Welcome back to Life's Chillin'. My name is Avital, and this week's Parsha is Parshat Tazria-Metzora. And the double Parsha of Tazria-Metzora really focus on physical states that change somebody's spiritual status. So I will give the example, or at least that they have spiritual, religious implications. So the ones that this Parsha covers is childbirth, male and female discharges, and the main focus, which is tsaras. And for all of these different physical sort of afflictions or physical states, it changes somebody's sort of spiritual status, and all of those states require a purification process. Now, the main focus again on the Parsha is on tsaras, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, but that's also what I want to focus on. So tsaras was sort of these white lesions it's commonly mistranslated, I would say, as leprosy. It wasn't leprosy. I would say that it sort of looked like, in the sense of it was white lesions that would appear on someone or on something, but it really has been disproven as being leprosy. So if you've heard that translation before, it's not it, but just for a visual representation, I figured I'd mention it. And it was these white lesions that would appear on somebody's body. And it could appear on the Torah goes through a bunch of different places where it could appear. It could be on their skin, on their hair, on garments, on walls, or objects in someone's home. And this would happen, the Torah tells us that the main reason that somebody would get tsaras, the most common reason that you would see these white lesions on a person, is for slander, for speaking lashon hara, for speaking poorly about other people, for gossiping, those sorts of things. But additionally, the commentators have come to believe that it was also for false oaths, immorality, robbery, and selfishness. And the idea being, because the people who had tsaras had to isolate themselves from the rest of the community, the idea was that it was because they had isolated somebody by speaking poorly about them, that sort of their punishment, the eye for an eye concept, is that like, because you isolated someone and you spoke badly about them, you have to be isolated from the community. But before I get to sort of that part, just going back to the basics of tsaras. So what would happen is that these white lesions would appear on someone, and they would take it to the kohen, to the priest. And the kohen would look at it, and let's just say it was sort of on your arm, okay? They would sort of isolate the area, and they would wait 7 days and see what happens. After 7 days, it's completely healed. It wasn't tsaras. It wasn't this affliction. And the person is, nothing has changed. They're ritually pure. But if after the 7 days, the kohen comes back and looks at this spot and it's spreading, it's going to other parts of the body, then it is tsaras. And then they have to go through this very specific process that I will read to you in a moment. So it says that the person would be considered contaminated when they were in this state of tsaras, at least in the spiritual sense. And it's quite an extreme process that this person who had tsaras would have to go through. It says, his garment shall be rent, the hair of his head shall be unshorn, and he shall cloak himself up to his lips. He is to call out, contaminated, contaminated. And then the Torah tells us that he would have to dwell in isolation outside of the camp while he has this affliction. And so that's quite an interesting thing, that the person would have to come out and say contaminated, contaminated, hide himself or herself, and then go and be away from the rest of the people. And interestingly, it could, when it would fall on somebody's home, the process that the Torah outlines is that initially they would remove the specific, if it was on stones on the wall, they would take out those stones and they would remove them from this house and take it to outside of the city. So sort of similar to the person, they had to be removed completely from the community. And once outside of the city, they would again isolate that part of the wall and see if the tsaras would spread. And if it would spread and it would spread and it would continue to spread, or sort of summarizing, then it might reach the point where the entire house had to be destroyed because it was considered like malignant tsaras. It was just spreading everywhere and there was nothing that you could do to cure it. And then once somebody would be healed from tsaras after their time of isolation, where they were going to be by themselves and to heal from this affliction, they would bring an offering. They would have to change their clothes, shave their heads, go into the mikvah, which is the ritual bath, wait for 7 days, and then they would do that process a second time. And only then that person could return to normal life. So it's quite a big ordeal. So again, somebody develops this saras, they get sent outside the camp, and then to come back in, it's this offering, it's shaving one's head, it's changing one's clothes. It's a complete overhaul of your life. And if it's you again, and it starts on your walls and your house and your clothes and your garments, you may have to really be starting over. And so what is the Torah teaching us here? How can we relate to this practice of that we don't see happening anymore? We're not living in the time of a temple where we have Kohanim and we have these physical manifestations of sort of spiritual states. How can we relate to it? I think the bigger lesson I was getting about saras and about why would somebody have to destroy their home and shave their head and start from scratch, I think it's because there are certain times in our life when we have fallen into habits that are so bad, when we have fallen into patterns that are just not, that we're having such a hard time getting out of. We all have bad habits, but sometimes they certainly get to this level where you're like, I just have to do something dramatic in order to make a change. And this was clearly something dramatic for these people. These people, let's just say again, that it was for the sin of speaking, of gossiping about other people. The habit was so bad that it changed their entire environment. Not only were they affected by it, but it sort of, everything around it reeks. The entire home is filled with this bad energy. And so I think the idea is that it was a complete cleansing. They really had to let go. They really had to strip themselves down to the bone, to sort of be broken down to their very core, and then to start to build again. And when they started to build again, you would hope that they would make these better choices, and they'd be able to break those patterns and those cycles, because this process was so dramatic. It was enough to just flip that switch and be like, oh, okay, this has gotten to be really out of hand, and I have to do something about it because I've literally destroyed what's around me. So, I would hope that we don't have, habits that are so bad that they're being destructive to our lives, but each one of us has something inside that we definitely want to change, a habit that needs to be broken. And sometimes it does require that dramatic overhaul, that completely starting over in order to make it happen. And so I think that is a very beautiful lesson we can learn from Parshat Tazria-Metzora. I wish you all a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.